this is my predictions for the 2023 Formula 1 season after pre-season testing. I will start with the team predictions and then move on to the drivers. So starting with P10 in the constructor standings, we have Williams. They have improved a lot this season and I do think they will score a few more points. They looked good in testing but they were too far back last season to suddenly be racing in the midfield. Another thing that will hurt them is Logan Sargent. I'm not saying he's a bad driver at all, he really impressed me in testing, but he is a rookie and also the rookie with the least amount of experience. Oscar Piastri was Alpine's reserve driver for 2022 and would have learned a lot there. And Nick de Vries, well, most people is even saying we can't call him a rookie, since he already scored his first points in F1 last season. And he would have learned a lot at Mercedes and he even won the Formula E World Championship. So going back to Logan Sargent, I think he will perform well, but he is still a rookie and he has a lot to learn. Going to P9, this was really a hard one and I couldn't decide between Haas and AlphaTauri, but after a lot of consideration I decided to put AlphaTauri in P9. I have to say, I don't think they will have a bad car and they will definitely be fighting in the midfield. It's just the fact that the midfield will be really close this season and I think the gap between P9 and P6 will only be a few points. AlphaTauri also looked decent in testing, but they did lose their main driver Pierre, but he is replaced by Nick de Vries, and like I already mentioned, Nick de Vries brings a lot of experience with him and I think they will improve the car a lot during the season. In 8th place we have Haas. They would have probably been P9 if it wasn't for Nico Hülkenberg joining the team. With both Magnussen and Hülkenberg, I really think the drivers can push each other and get some great performances. But I do think a big fear Haas will have is the two of the drivers fighting. We know they have a bit of a history, but I think if they can put that behind them and focus on the team, they can really achieve a lot. In 7th place we have Alfa Romeo. A bit like last year, I think they will have a strong start to the season, but they will fall back as the season continues. I hope we see the same Valtteri Bottas we saw last season, getting everything out of the car, and this will help them secure P7. And now it's time for P6, and a big shock to a lot of you, but it is McLaren. A bit similar to last year, the car looked terrible in testing. The team also publicly said that they didn't hit their goals and the car was slower than expected. But if it was similar to last season, why wouldn't they finish in P5 again? Well, that's because last season there was only one midfield team that was faster than them, and it was Alpine. But this year it looks like Aston Martin and Alpine is both faster, and I have to wonder if Oscar Piastri is regretting his career move of throwing away his Alpine seat to race for McLaren. Now moving on to P5, they and P4 will be miles ahead of the rest of the midfield and it's a really hard decision to make. But looking at testing, we saw Aston Martin looked great, but what about Alpine? The team said everything looks great, but the timing sheets didn't say that. This only tells me Alpine was definitely sandbagging, but we'll get to that in a while. So in 5th place we have Aston Martin. No offense to Lance Stroll, but he will be far behind Alonso and this will make it hard for Aston Martin in their battle with Alpine. But it's clear that Aston Martin is much better than last season, and for the beginning of the season I think they might even be fighting the 3rd team. But going to P4, Alpine. They were the only team that didn't use soft tires in testing and were also the team with the most porpoising. And I know this sounds bad, but with the team's confidence I'm sure they were just running the car on the limit and seeing what is possible. The only thing that might be a problem for Alpine is the Gasly and Ocon partnership. Like you know, Gasly and Ocon have a pretty bad history of each other, with Gasly a few years back even saying he won't ever race alongside Esteban Ocon. And then we also know Ocon have had a lot of crashes with his teammates in the past, so this might be a big problem for the team. But on the other hand, both of the drivers said they moved on and don't have a problem with each other anymore, and I think if they can work together, I really think Alpine will be strong this season. Now going to the top 3. In 3rd place I have Mercedes, but does that mean they will have a terrible start to the season like last year? Well, no, but I'm sure they will still be a bit behind for the first few races, but I do think they will win multiple races this season and will definitely be a strong team. But their drivers might also have a problem this season, with George Russell and Lewis Hamilton both being some of the most competitive drivers on the grid. What would happen if they have an opportunity for a win? Would they hold their position to secure a race win for the team, or will they try something to get the win for themselves? Well, you might say there won't be a problem since they clearly showed us last year in Brazil that they can get a win without fighting, but that was because Russell had the pace to keep Hamilton out of overtaking range. But what will happen if the driver behind is on newer, faster tires? Will the leading driver be willing to give up the win? I don't think so, but we will have to wait and see. And now the top 2. This is a pretty hard decision and I am a Ferrari fan, so I have to ignore my heart and listen to my head. While I do think Red Bull with Max Verstappen in the car is the fastest car, it does look like Sergio Perez is struggling a bit more, and I don't see that at Ferrari at all. So in 2nd place I have Red Bull. Like I mentioned, it does look like Sergio Perez is struggling in the car, and the Red Bull wind tunnel penalty for the cost cap and the constructor standings will hurt them a lot through the season. They might even start out as the fastest car, but they won't be able to bring out the amount of upgrade that Ferrari can. So with that said, I really believe Ferrari can be the constructors champions this season, as they have two drivers that can both get everything out of the car, but that doesn't mean they can win the drivers championship. So let's move on to the drivers championship. Like I already mentioned, the Williams will be slow and Logan Sargent is still a rookie. So in P20 we have Logan Logan Sargent. P19 might be a big shock to a lot of you, but I have to say Yuki Tsunoda. We don't have any bad drivers on the grid, and like I mentioned, the AlphaTauri will be the second slowest car. I know his teammate is a rookie and in the same car, but I do think with the great feedback that Vries is able to give the team, they might develop the car a bit more to his liking. In P18 we have Alex Albon, who will have a good season, but the Williams will still be the slowest car on the grid. In P17 we have Oscar Piastri. I know people have high expectations for him, but with McLaren not being great and him being a rookie driver, he's going to struggle, and that's why I think he will finish in P17. In P16 we have Nick de Vries. A good season for him, but like all the drivers before him, the car can't do much more. In P15 we have Nico Hülkenberg. His teammate Kevin Magnussen will finish in P14. I do think both the drivers will do a good job in the Haas, but the Haas won't have the pace to battle in the midfield later on in the season. In P13 I have Guanyu Zhou. A good season for him, but he's not on his teammates level yet, but not too far off. In P12 we have Lando Norris. Like I mentioned, the McLaren just won't have the pace to battle at the front of the grid. Even if he gets everything out of the car, I don't think he'll achieve much this season, but I do hope I'm wrong. In P11 we have Stroll. He's going up against one of the hardest teammates of his career, and I really think even though Alonso is older, he's still one of the fastest drivers on the grid. Lance is also starting the season on the back foot, and this will just make the gap between him and Alonso bigger. Now going to the top 10. In 10th place we have Valtteri Bottas. A good season for him, and I really think he will have some great performances this season. In 9th place we have Pierre. Like I mentioned, he and Ocon will both have a good season, but I do think Ocon will beat him, but it's just because it's his first season at Alpine. In 8th place we have Esteban Ocon. Both him and Gasly might score a podium this season. And in 7th place we have Fernando Alonso. From what I've seen from Aston Martin so far and what I know about Fernando Alonso, I'm sure he will be best of the rest. I can't wait to see him battling for podiums. Now we have the top 6. This season they won't be so far ahead of the rest of the grid because they don't have such a big performance gap to the midfield, so small mistakes will let them drop into the battle with Alpine and Aston Martin. I do think P4 to P6 will be separated by only a few points, so in P6 we have Lewis Hamilton. He won't have a bad season at all, and I do think he will be very close to his teammates, but I do think he will end in P6. In 5th place we have Sergio Perez. Like I mentioned, I do think Red Bull will suit Max much more, and Max will be able to get much more out of the car. In 4th place we have George Russell. Last season was his first season at Mercedes, and he managed to win Lewis Hamilton. Now I know Lewis Hamilton was focusing on the car a bit more last season, but like I mentioned, this was only Russell's first season. Moving on to the top 3. In 3rd place we have Carlos Sainz. He won't be far away from the top 2. I just really think Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc is in a league of their own. So going to the top 2, I really hope we see Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc race like they did the first few races last season, and it would be great if it can continue until the last race. Like I mentioned, I'm a Ferrari fan, but I do think Charles Leclerc will finish in P2 because Max Verstappen is just insane in the Red Bull at the moment. And then in 1st place, and he would be a 3-time world champion, Max Verstappen. Let me know your predictions in the comment section down below, and thanks for watching.